Okay, this week we are talking self-editing. Like I just mentioned, we are going to be covering how to work on your own stuff, where to start, and what you need. So I'm going to start by explaining the 3 or 4, depending on who you talk to, types of editing there are. There are definitely more than this if you want to start breaking things down into super tiny areas, but there are 3 basic types of editing for books. The first type is developmental editing, which looks at structure and characters and plot and pacing. It's the big overview. That is usually the type of editing that is done first. Second, you have line editing, which looks at the way the sentences are constructed. It looks at syntax. It looks at whether or not you've used too many of the same word too close together. It looks at phrasing. It's the part that when people think of getting their book edited, this is the one that most people think of. Then you have copy editing, which just looks at grammar and punctuation. And finally, you have proofreading, which is the one that when you've done everything else, it's another person, preferably, going through and making sure all of the quotation marks are facing the right way. Proofreading technically happens once the book has been typeset and is in proof format. So that is why it's called proofreading. So traditionally, this would be when the final formatted version, maybe an ARC, is sent to a proofreader and they receive the instructions on proofing it. So those are the 3 primary types of editing, and that is what we are going to be talking about today. Now, those of you who have just finished books or have just typed the end, congratulations. And we're going to be starting with developmental editing, which is, I'm going to include a technique that I provide to all of my coaching clients and a lot of my editing clients too, that will help you tremendously. So self-developmental editing can feel kind of daunting, and it can be kind of difficult to get a bird's eye view of your own book, because when you read it, you've read the entire thing, you wrote the entire thing word by word, and going back and reading it, you're likely to skim. And I don't blame you, all right? That is not a critique. So the first thing I suggest people do when they're ready to edit, which may be a couple days after they've finished their book, it might be a couple of weeks. For me, it's within 15 minutes because I hate myself and I can't stop myself from doing it, so I've just given in and I start editing almost immediately, unless I finish at like 5 a.m. and need to go to sleep. I try and make myself sleep on it, but I can't always make myself sleep on it, so that's a thing that I do that I'm not going to criticize anybody for doing. So that is absolutely a reality. However, so the technique I'm going to suggest to you is you go back and read your book, and then you write a new outline. What I mean by this is, whether you've written an outline or not to write your story, which is fine, once you've written it, go back and chapter by chapter write a detailed outline of what happens in which chapter. What characters show up, what characters leave. Once you have done this, you are going to have a bird's eye view of your story. And you can skim to write this outline, by the way. You don't need to read every single page or every single paragraph. But you should at least read it so you know what happens in what order, because sometimes what we think we wrote isn't exactly what we really wrote, so make sure you actually do at least skim the material. But writing that outline is going to be extremely valuable for you, and that is one of the things that I have most of my coaching clients or my editing clients, or if I'm doing a developmental edit, this is one of the first things I do so I can get a really solid view of it. I just read the book and write an outline. Yep, that is exactly it, Anagram. So while you're writing this outline, you're going to encounter things like plot holes. Teague, today we're talking about how to edit your own book before you send it off to anybody else. And if you aren't sending it off to anybody else, which I advise you do, but I recognize isn't financially viable for everybody, this is going to get you as close to having a clean version as possible. Ignore Me6Bot. I'm going to have to turn that off later. But anyway, so once you have this outline written, and as you write it, you're going to start noticing these characters that walk off scene and never come back. Or you're going to notice a gigantic gaping plot hole that you're like, what did I do? How did I fix this? Or you're going to notice a character putting something down 30 times that they never actually picked up. Make sure you... Oh, there goes the cat. I'm no longer sufficient. But those are the kinds of things you're looking for. Also, you might notice that, wow, I didn't develop this character in the way I intended to, and this doesn't really work now. Or I started the character this way, and when I finished writing them, it looked like this. So, Ellie, so a developmental by somebody else is not a pitch or blurb, though that can be a thing, but usually pitch or blurb edits are sort of their own deal. That's a separate service. Like if I'm going to work with somebody on their blurb, it's not going to be as expensive as a dev edit because frankly, it's not going to take me as much time. But what I'm going to be providing feedback on is the outline, the characters, and it's mostly just focused on the manuscript. We're only talking about that. Blurbs and stuff and marketing copy are their own unique hell, and you're going to want an editor who's skilled in those particular things. So, right, exactly, lead. So, sometimes you start a story one way and you start with one tone and end up with another, or a character starts being written one way and ends up as another thing. That is a normal experience to have. Carly, yep, that is where we're talking. That's what we're talking about right now. So if you spend 3 chapters on a character waking up, that is a pacing issue, which is one of the things developmental editing covers, is we talk about pacing. Yeah, anagram, that's a thing. So all of these pieces, we're looking at the broad strokes, like, okay, this character started one way and ended up another. Okay, right. But as you're working on this, you're going to be seeing that is a thing that you're going to notice, or maybe not. Some people have more experience and can avoid some of those things. Other people, particularly newer writers, are going to come across moments where they question their sanity and whether or not they want to keep writing and think they're garbage. Ignore that. It's not true. First drafts suck for everybody, and if your first draft sucks, welcome to the club. We've all been there. We are all probably still there, so don't hate yourself for it. It's okay. Once you have that outline, and also while you're writing the outline, ignore the temptation to try and fix it now. That's very important. I should have stated that sooner. While you're writing this outline, do not start trying to fix it while you're writing your outline and reading the story. That is, you can make notes to yourself using the comments function, but don't start trying to fix it now, because if you start trying to fix it now, you're never going to get that bird's eye view you're trying to get to. So rein in that temptation. Make a note if you have to, if you just, highlight an area and hit comment like, wow, this is awful, and a character doesn't need to spend 3 chapters waking up. Or maybe they do. This might be that kind of story. I'm not gonna, sometimes things get weird and sometimes things work or don't. So whatever it is, but you can make notes to yourself in the margins, but resist the temptation to change anything while you're writing your outline. Because if you change anything now, you might create other issues later. Yeah, exactly, Carly. You're supposed to write the book, just write your book. The first draft is just get the story out of yourself and edit afterwards. If you try editing while you write, you're going to end up in this horrible cycle where you aren't really getting anywhere and you're just going to confuse yourself. So yes, just write your book and then start editing it. Yeah, a lot of us struggle with that. It's hard and it's painful. I see, Heather B, you are flashing, but I'm not hearing any sound from you. You're very quiet in the background. Are you intentionally on mic or not? Like, I'm not upset. I'm not sure, so I wanted to pause. Okay. No problem. Okay, so now that we've gotten our outline written, take some time. There are some folks who find it important to maybe do this next step on some note cards. You know, some 3x5s. I've got a stack of them on my desk that I'm not going to dig for to show on camera, but promise they're there. I've been using them for D&D mostly, but they work for this too. Write out the chapters sometimes, or the segments. If you're doing the beat sheet, write out your beats on these cards and look at them. And sometimes you might need to take these cards and put them in a different order. I was recently working with a client who had finished a book. He thought he was done when he realized that this book actually needed to be 2 books, and what he thought was going to be book 2 is going to be book 3. So he reorganized all of these chapters to make sure they were also correct in the timeline, because he sometimes had things that were happening out of sequential order because he was working in individual documents and kind of putting them all together. Some writers do that. Again, no judgment. I find that confusing. I prefer to keep everything sequential in one place. I also use YWriter, so rather than having a bunch of different Word files, I keep them all in my writing software, which saves my brain, because since I have ADHD, I will lose everything and it will be a disaster. I can't even number my chapters correctly in sequence half the time, let alone doing anything else. If I were to try and write them out of order, it would be a disaster for me. However, there are people who do that. That said, looking at your outline and making sure everything is all of your scenes, are they in order? Do they make sense sequentially? Are they there? Did you miss anything you needed to write? Are there any scenes you need to add? Are there any scenes you need to remove? This is the time when you start making those decisions while you're looking at this big outline. And I typically will write, to explain the outline here. Yeah, Plotter definitely exists. I know Scrivener does things like that. I know YWriter has some of those capabilities. That's an excellent suggestion. So once you, the way I outline this is I will write a sentence or 2 per scene. For me, each chapter is typically about a scene long because I tend to write short chapters. I think that's, again, a function of my ADHD, but it works for me. You might be writing much longer chapters with multiple different scenes in them, which is also fine, but I would give at least 1 or 2 sentences per scene to describe what's going on and who's in it, so that you can, during this step, look at, okay, is there a scene I missed? Did I intend to add something here? Or is there a scene here that just doesn't make sense in this spot, or make sense at all? Should I remove it? And now that you have this outline, you can start making those choices. Write yourself some notes and be like, okay, so going back to Carly's suggestion here of multiple different chapters of somebody waking up, as I whack my microphone, because I talk with my hands. If you look at this and be like, I really don't need 3 chapters of somebody waking up. I can either turn this into 1 chapter, or maybe I can cut out 2 of them, or whatever it is, and look at the information that's in the 2 chapters you're considering cutting. If it's important information, you can condense it into chapter 1, or maybe move it to the chapter afterwards. There might be places for that information that you can kind of slip it in there, but this is where you start cutting off the fat, so to speak. There are usually, in this stage, 2 kinds of writers. There's writers like me who write everything so bare bones that there is really nothing to cut for the most part, because if I did cut anything, it would stop making sense. And then there are and I don't have any description at this stage, really. Like, a big part of my self-editing is going back and adding descriptions of places and people and all that other stuff. I tend to write without it, which is confusing for folks. So that is, and the other flavor of writer is the one who tends to put in everything and the kitchen sink and has all of the information in there and starts needing to evaluate what they are going to cut. Neither of these is wrong. Neither of them is better than the other. They're just 2 different ways of approaching your first draft. But if you are the type of writer who has a huge number of scenes in there with a lot of bloated stuff that you're like, I don't know if I need this, I think I'm going to cut it. Or I need to add this because I didn't actually explain why the MacGuffin was important. Just going to stare at myself for a minute in the mirror. Then that is obviously part of this process. This also includes characters. Are there characters who don't add anything to the story and are just kind of along for the ride? Or is there a space where you kind of need to add somebody? Now, keep in mind this developmental edit. This might include stripping your story back down to a skeleton, going back and rewriting the whole thing from the ground up if you need to do that. Not everybody has to do that. No, that is not something everyone needs to do, but some of my novels I've had to do that. My high fantasy novel, which one day will come out, is I have rewritten it from ground zero, and I'm probably going to do it again now that I have a better vision for what I'm doing. 3 times now, and I'm about to start time 4. Carly, you ask about how I feel so cold-blooded. How did I get so cold-blooded about this? Honestly, practice. You know, I care about my stories. My stories are really important to me. My ability to just be like, you work, you don't, is not, excuse you, my cat is scratching things, is not so much that I don't care about my story. It's not so much that I don't, like, feel things about my story, because there are definitely moments during this process where I whine and cry and kick my feet, but I like that scene. However, recognizing that it doesn't fit in the broader structure and narrative, sometimes you gotta cut it. Or, in my case, usually it's like, but I don't want to spend a bunch of time describing stuff. Can't I just give them what they do? Do I have to describe everything? The answer is, sort of. That is a thing. And I'm not suggesting you cut the world building lead, don't get me wrong. I'm saying you need to go through and evaluate, like, does this world building need to be all at once in this spot? Or could I give this information in pieces through the story when it becomes relevant, or when something comes up where I could tell that story, where there's a little downtime, where there's some space? That kind of thing might be really important. Cutting it out entirely, not a good idea. But now high fantasy has a lot more space, and so does sci-fi for that. But there you go. And yeah, that is absolutely true, Tara. Having experience with critique and looking at your book as a professional definitely comes with experience. It comes with practice. I have been doing this for 12 years now. Yeah, about 12 years. So I have a lot of experience in looking at my stuff and going, nope, not you. And I have learned not to take that personally, because what sometimes seems like a good idea at 3 a.m. when I'm writing fueled by caffeine and maybe wine might not be as good an idea the next day. But since I don't go back and edit it while I'm writing, unless something is entirely incoherent, in which case I'll cut it and start over, I usually don't do any editing while I'm writing. So sometimes it's 3 a.m. word vomit that I'm working with, and I recognize that that is not the kind of thing that I want to be out on Front Street that everybody sees. So that is how I got to the point of viciousness with my own writing. And it's yeah, it's basically, you want to make sure your story cleans up nice. It might start out as a feral mud ball that has bitten and will bitten again, but when you're done, it's going to come out of the groomers looking like a dog. So there's that. Right, anagram. So sometimes, sometimes things end up in there that we don't expect. So that is more or less your developmental edits pattern. You're going to read the book, make notes to yourself in the margins if you must. If you come across something that you realize, ooh, I really need to fix that, don't fix it now. Make yourself a note, keep reading. Then when you get to the end, look at your outline, and you can use Plotter, you can use note cards, I use text files a lot. You can write it out by hand, however you choose to, but you look at everything and then decide what you keep, what you leave, if anything needs to be added. If I started writing a character at the very beginning of the story one way, and they end up a completely different way by the end of the story, then I really need to consider, how do I want that character portrayed? Now, if I change halfway through and decide this character makes more sense this way, I have to go back and make him make sense from the beginning. Because that's, consistency. You need to be consistent. So that kind of thing, that is really what this round is going to be. And also these 3 types of editing, they are 3 separate times you go through your book. So once you have added what you need to add, removed what you need to remove, and worked through all of those different structural elements, which may take some time, then you're going to move on to line editing. And that is where the software comes in. So I'm going to share my screen with all of you lovely folks. Give me just a second here. I'm trying to... Where are you? There we are. Oh, interesting. It's not showing my screen. That's interesting. Hold on. I need to fix this. This is doing a... Fine. I'm going to have you see my entire monitor once this loads, and that is how we're going to do this. You are going to see all the things. There. All right. So what is on your screen right now, or will be if you click the Watch Live button in your Discord. If you don't know how to do it, I'm sorry, but we'll figure that out. So what you are looking at right now is my copy of Word for Windows. I am working on Office 365, the most recent version. So if it looks weird to you, maybe you haven't updated. Also, I have the more beta testing version. So this is an actual draft of Book 2 of the Smoke and Magic series. This right here is one of the comments I was mentioning. This is going to become your friend. Well, and this function, and it exists in OpenOffice, LibreOffice, all of the other Office facsimiles. And yes, Ellie, when I'm editing, I transfer everything to Word out of YWriter for the editing tools that Word provides. If you don't have Word, OpenOffice, LibreOffice, there are a number of alternatives that work just as well and are open source and free. But I prefer Microsoft Word because of the plugins. And we're going to get to these guys up here in a minute. So, we have this right here. This is a comment. This was left by my dear friend Joe Weinberg, who was one of my beta readers. And he was like, he was leaving a comment, just this is a, wait, what sort of moment from book 1 where he missed something. But this right here, lead, feel better, I hope you get some sleep. This will be up on the replay for you. So we have these comments. Adding one of these, you go, if you're in Word 365, over to the Review tab. And you will see all of these different options. I also have mine on dark mode, you may not. You can also add a comment by hovering over some text you have highlighted and clicking New Comment. You do that, little thing will pop up off to the side, you write your comment, great, keep moving. And that is how you leave a comment in Microsoft Word. These guys, now they've also added the ability to reply to comments, so if you have a beta reader reading this and you're passing things back and forth, you can have a conversation in comments now. Before you just both had to leave comments and drown in it. So they added that feature much like Google Docs did. If you also have no ability to use anything else, you can do this editing stuff in Google Docs, but Google Docs will hang like crazy with longer documents. So if you're going the Google Docs route, do short pieces at a time. When you start doing your line editing, one of the things you can do, if I'm editing for me, I don't always do this, is something called track changes. Right here, I turn track changes on. Right here you can see it's on. And if I want to add something, I have it right now set to simple markup, which is my preferred because it makes it look obviously. So if I want to add something, I type that in. You can see a little red bar over here. This is indicating that something on that line was changed. There are several views. All markup will show you right here. It'll highlight it in blue. However, recognize that if you are deleting stuff, it will start looking cluttered, and it will keep the things you deleted showing them as a strike through. So that is something you can use. That is actually how I edit for my clients, is using tracked changes. Now, you may or may not find this useful for you. Again, this feature is also available in LibreOffice, OpenOffice, and in Google Docs, just in different places. I don't have all of those softwares to go through and show you where to find it, but in Word 365 and earlier versions, you go to the Review tab and you can turn it on. I find simple markup is the cleanest way to view because it shows everything as if it was accepted. Now, I didn't mention this in all markup. If you have these changes and you want to accept them, you can right-click it or what have you, and then you have accept insertion or reject insertion. You can accept or reject the changes as you choose. You can also go up here and look at next changes, previous changes, and all of that. Those are all various options. I'm not going to get too deep into it. When you're line editing, though, this is where the first of the plugins I'm going to show you comes into place. This plugin is not available for any program except Word. However, you can get a standalone program that includes this. This plugin is Smart Edit. And we'll see if it hangs my computer with all of these things running. I don't know if it will. We'll give it a second to figure itself out. It takes a little bit. But what Smart Edit does is it is an algorithm. It's sort of like Grammarly or the other programs of a similar vein. It's kind of like those. I much prefer Smart Edit over those because Smart Edit allows me to customize what I want to find as an editor rather than telling me to add commas to places commas don't need to be. Word's grammar check does the same thing. It likes to suggest you add commas in places that aren't right. Smart Edit doesn't actually look at your grammar. Personally, I find that Word's grammar check is probably equivalent to what you'd find on Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid for the most part, at least in my experience. If you are really new to grammar and punctuation, Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid and those other softwares may be of use to you. However, if you have a solid grasp of the English language, they will only be of so much use, and you might find Smart Edit gets you more bang for your buck. You'll have more mileage. This is going to take a while, I think. So Smart Edit runs your book through a number of checks. I'm just going to stop that because it's going to take a very long time. I can choose what checks to run. Let's see if I can remember how. There we go. Well, here's some of them. This is one of the checks. Since I aborted it, it probably doesn't have everything. But as you can see over here, it will tell me how frequently I use certain words. Now, a lot of writers have crutch words or habit words. They will use over and over and over again. And they may not realize that they use this word all the darn time until something like this shows you how many instances of that word you use in this document. And so this is a very useful tool. I really like it. I have had also for an editor, it allows me to assess, does this author have any problem words I didn't notice? Do I have any I need to change? It does the same thing with phrases. Normally my system isn't this slow, but I'm running 2 different recording softwares and streaming, so my system's like, thanks, Mom. So that's why it's a little slow and chunky, but you also will have repeated phrases. Again, a lot of authors have crutch phrases. You can go through this and see, do I have any? Right now, my top phrase is one of the, and I use it 37 times in 62,000 words, so I think I'm okay. So this is an excellent tool. As you can see here, it's not going to give you grammar, but it is going to give you things like, I think I stopped it while it was in the middle of this one, Adverbs Results. It will count all of the adverbs in your book, show you how many times you use them. Let's see if this will hang. Show you how many times you use them, and let you find all of them in your manuscript. You can just go through the list and evaluate each sentence as you find it. Do I need this? Is this right? Should I keep this? Is this adverb useful? Now, I've talked about adverbs in the past and how they're good and bad, and how I don't think that we should remove all of them from our writing, but using ly adverbs needs to be done judiciously. An adverb should not be used if it's kind of propping up a weak verb. So the one I always use is he ran quickly versus he sprinted, he rushed, he charged. There are better verbs for that. So this allows you to go through and look at your adverbs and decide which ones you want to keep. Some of these are fluff only. Well, that's not a fluff one. I don't use, as you can see, I have a number of adverbs, but most of them, like, I could easily deal with confirmed, like more powerful than I could easily deal with confirmed. This right here, easily, I mean, it's not a necessary word, but it does matter, and it's not propping up a weak verb anywhere, so I'm keeping that one. So you can go through and look at all of these, and if you have tracked changes on, it will track your changes. As you can see, there are a bunch of other things. This one right here is one of my favorite. User-defined monitored words and phrases. This one right here is where I actually put in all the to-be verb conjugations. So am, is, are, was, were, be, being, and been, to make sure that I am not overusing them. Again, I'm not saying to remove them from your lexicon entirely, because they exist in the English language for a reason. However, there are places where you don't need them and where it inhibits your writing. I also have the word that in here because the word that oftentimes unnecessary and does not help. It's one of those words that likes to sneak in and repeat itself, and you can get rid of a large percentage of them without damaging the integrity of your writing. If it's comprehensible and makes perfect sense, if you remove the word that, she knew that there was a log on the other side of the fire. She knew there was a log on the other side of the fire. The word that is not necessary for logic there. You can understand it just as well without it. So if you can understand it without the word that, remove it, and it will start. Also, those of you who struggle with massive word counts, it'll start shrinking your word count a little bit, which will make your, which will obviously be an improvement. So that's one of those little things that you can go through and drop your word count by a surprising amount by just finding that. I really like this one. You can, again, these are words that I've defined. If you have other words that you want to make sure you don't use too many times in your story, this is a great way to do it. There are other things like punctuation. It will make sure that your punctuation, it doubles checks it, much like a grammar checker. I don't use this as much. Yeah, misplaced, misused, or suspect punctuation. So again, unlike Word's grammar checker, I find that having everything in a list off to the side is useful. So there are, as you can see, a number of checks. I won't walk you through all of them. It'll pull up cliches, sentence start words and phrases results. This one is important for some writers who like to start sentences the same way every time. Might be important. So this one, it's okay. So here's the various punctuations, curly quotes, all this other stuff. Oh, there's a bunch of straight quotes in here. Look at that, curly quotes versus straight quotes. That is actually something we're going to be bringing up with the next plugin for proofreading. But as you can see, this has use in line editing, and that's mostly what we're focused on right now, not the punctuation. I'm just bringing this up to show you. Line editing, as I said, is mostly reading your story line by line to make sure your prose is tight and clean and says what you want it to say. Make sure you're going after, did I repeat a word twice in a row? Is that something I did? Because Lord knows I do that. I'll get to that. She went to the, what did she go to? Brain? Brain, come back. Oh, the store, and I'll take the twice because I paused in the middle and picked it up, and that's a, so that's a really common thing. You're going through looking for that sort of thing, and again, looking for those adverbs, looking for those to-be verbs. Did you write this, is it written really passively? Are you using too many adjectives. Like what is your, you're looking for things that you can clean up, things that need fixing. This is another thing for this one is all of your verb tense correct? I recently was helping somebody who switched verb tense a couple times per sentence in places and got stuck. She didn't know if she was writing in present tense or past tense and sort of jammed the two together, and it ended up a headache for everybody, her especially. So that is absolutely a thing that happens sometimes, and I'm not picking on anybody when I say that. It is a very real thing that very much happens in writing at times. It's just a thing. And the good thing about this self-editing is don't let it hurt your ego. Because if you're reading what you wrote and you're going, oh God, why did I make that mistake? I am awful. How could I possibly have accomplished this? I suck. I should quit writing. No. Right now you can fix it before anybody else ever sees that you made these ridiculous mistakes. You can fix these things and nobody has to know. No one has to know that you typed the word the backwards 9 out of 10 times. Nobody has to know that. We can fix it. Nobody sees this. Shh, it's a secret. The readers will never know. This is the point in the game where you make it look like you know what you're supposed to be doing and meant to do this the entire time. So, if you're going through this, don't feel bad when you find problems and horrible mistakes and realize, crap, I used all of these adjectives everywhere to prop up every verb in my story. If you are looking at your story, this is the time when you fix it and nobody else has to see that. It's okay. It's okay if your writing is awful the first time because right now you're fixing it and nobody needs to know. So, the fact that you have errors now does not mean you're a bad writer. It does not mean you should quit. It does not mean you need to hate yourself. It just means that you wrote a first draft and you got further than 2/3 of the writers I've met. Congratulations. You're already winning the race. So, you've finished your first draft. This is editing. Do not be mean to yourself. I know it's tempting, but don't do it. And no, you are absolutely not the only person who does things like that, Ellie. I have it all over the place in my first drafts. I do it all the time because I pause and restart, or to, or all of the little words where I get to the middle of a sentence and I'm like, what was I writing? Where were they going? What was I doing? Who am I? And then have to restart again, and the repeating is a thing. So don't feel bad about any of this stuff. Don't let it hurt you. 24601, right. Do not let this hurt you. It's okay. It should, it might be a challenge. It might not feel amazing to realize I have made so many mistakes and now I have to go fix them. But this is where we're at. So, once you have gone through your book, and this one, we're line editing as the name implies, line by line. So, this is the one where you actually have to read every sentence. This may take you a while. It might be frustrating. But when you're done, you get to go on to copy editing, which is going to be doing the same darn thing all over again. Plus static. So you are going to be doing this again, but we have tools for this. So I'm going to close out of Smart Edit and show you the next part of my handy-dandy toolkit, which is Perfect It. The version that I got was the last version that you can just buy outright. It is now a subscription service. So, for those of you who are authors, what I suggest you do is pay for a month when you're editing, and then don't pay for the next month. So just pay for it when you need it. For me, I need it all the time because I am a professional editor and I use it at least once or twice a week. So for me, it makes sense. For you, it might just make sense to pay for it when you need it. Sort of like a lot of the marketing tools and everything else, pay for them when you're using them. When you're not using them, don't. So we have perfected. Again, this may hang my system. It might take a minute. We'll see what happens. I'm not sure how this will go. But what perfected does is perfected is the proofreader's friend. Perfected, okay, thank you for that. It hides things and it shows you things in revision mode, but what perfected does is it goes through and checks things during your copy editing process. For example, it will make sure that you are using toward or towards consistently. Now, those of you who may not have realized that, you should pick one when you're writing. I prefer toward because I don't like towards. It feels juvenile to me. I don't know why, but that's just me. It will make sure that when you're choosing your spelling, it's consistent. That is incredibly important. And while using these is not replacing an editor, it is going to get you a lot further along than just staring at your book until you want to go drinking. These tools are not a replacement for a human being, but they will get you a lot further. And if you use them effectively, they will actually drop the cost of editing by a pretty significant margin, because the less time and effort the editor has to put into this, the less money it's going to cost you at the end. So, what I'm telling you here is stuff that ends up saving you money in the long run. And if you can't hire an editor, these pieces are going to be the closest you can get with your budget. Perfected, I don't know how much it is per month, but it's not excessively expensive. Smart Edit, I think, was $50 when I purchased it, something like that. It's not free. There is a Smart Edit free version, but it doesn't have all the same bells and whistles. However, you could squeak by with it. One of the things the free version does not have is the ability to define the words you want it to find. So you couldn't tell it to find all the to-be verbs and the that's and everything else. So that is absolutely something to be aware of. However, if you want to try it and aren't sure you like it, you can try it for free. Also, Perfected does have a trial period. So if you aren't sure if you like it, download it and use the trial. Okay, it looks like it might have picked up. So right here, hyphenation of phrases. This is one of those consistency things. It says ogre-sized. Okay, I hyphenate it 3 times. And I don't hyphenate it once, being ogre-sized. Which one should I... Again, consistency is really important. And choosing consistency is going to be useful. Now, I'm not going to edit this document in particular because I'm actually doing track changes and stuff on another master version. This is a version somebody sent me. But it looks for, again, consistency. So it'll look for consistency in hyphenation. It will look for consistency in other things as it hangs in phrases. It will look for consistency in spelling. It will look for, are you using all straight quotes or are you using all curly quotes? Which do you prefer? It will find them, and whichever one you say you want, tell it I want this one, and it will fix all of them. You don't have to go through and stare at every quotation mark and guess if it's straight or curly anymore. And you can probably tell by the tone of my voice that I have had to do that, and that I hated doing it, because it is a unique and personal hell. Also, recognize, this is a thing for those of you who use Scrivener and other writing softwares, those softwares sometimes turn your quotes into a disaster piece. Recognize that you may have to go through and double check whether or not they're all straight or all curly. And if you don't know what straight or curly quotes are, that is something you'll want to learn if you're going to be formatting your story. So, yeah, this actually can be fun. Right here, so as we look at it, they're going to, one way, out of date. So sometimes it's not correct. So in this case, out of date periodicals, this is a compound adjective where saying something is out of date is not the same thing. So this is why you need eyes. Double check and make sure. Sometimes it just is like, hey, you hyphenated it here and not here. Sometimes you do that on purpose, but this will give you the opportunity to check every one of these. So plant my feet and, again, we have a compound adjective here. Whereas the other time I use it, it's not a compound adjective. So you can go through and do that with all of these. It will find all of them, and you can make a choice. My still warm cocoa, compound adjective. The engine was still warm, not a compound adjective, no hyphenation. So in this case, the consistency is, you don't want it the same way both times because they are serving different grammatical functions. So that is a thing that you're going to come across, which is why I say the software needs a human brain behind it, because it can show you all these things, but you have to make your own decisions. It looks like the hyphenation is all ironed out. And so this kind of thing is what proofreading is. If you don't have Smart Edit or Perfect It, this is where one of the places, Grammarly, or I think Hemingway might do it, or Pro Writing Aid, or there are other softwares out there that will help you go through this. But copy editing is really, am I using straight quotes? Am I using curly quotes? Am I using an Oxford comma? Making sure my punctuation is consistent all the way through. Am I using toward or towards? You know, making all of these little decisions on consistency and how you want to have your style written. If you're working for a publisher, the publisher will have a style guide. The style guide at Insomnia is, I prefer toward over towards. However, if an author is internally consistent with towards, I'm not changing it. If they're internally inconsistent and bounce between the two, I'm choosing toward, and they have no say in the matter. So, looking over here, we are looking at, here's one of the spelling variations, among or amongst. Now, this is saying they're the same word. I'm not sure if it is. I'd have to double check. I'm not sure they're exactly the same function. But this right here, it's showing you spelled this differently. And if I say, oh, well, let's fix that, I would click Fix or Fix All if you don't want to look at them, but I suggest highly that you do. But you can tell it to fix the problem, and it'll turn it to whichever one you chose. Spelling variation, backwards versus backward. Well, again, I prefer backward versus backwards. I don't like the S's for some reason. I have a vendetta against S. I don't know why. So I would choose backward and fix it and keep going. Again, I'm not really making any changes to this document because I have this document just mostly for the comments that my friend left so that I can do developmental changes on my book. But I pulled this one up because it was an unfinished and unedited manuscript for the most part to show you exactly these kind of things. Got versus gotten. This is another one. Of course, sometimes, as you'll see right here, hey, should it be got, forgot, or forgotten? Most people say forgotten, not forgot, which is an antiquated usage. It's not wrong, but it's antiquated. You know, may old acquaintance be forgot, not forgotten. But it's not wrong. Again, that's the kind of thing you want to be consistent. But it's, since it right here is deciding that got is, do we want that to be gotten? It would, if I said to change it, it would be forgotten. So this, again, is sort of thing you need to kind of look at and be like, I don't think so, but thank you. That is the sort of... So got was my usual preferred. I used gotten a few times. I think, again, I don't think got and gotten serve exactly the same grammatical service. I think he had gotten... Like, he had got lost, I don't think is grammatically correct. It might be correct in certain vernaculars, but I don't think it's actually correct. He had gotten, I believe, is correct. Yeah, the existential crises abound. So this part might cause some existential crises. You may be sitting here like, I don't know if I actually know how to write anymore. How do I English? Help? No comprende, and just decide you're speaking Spanish forever and be done with it. And that is possible. But so recognize that this may cause some hair pulling and some anguish. But again, gonna go through. Do you want G-R-E-Y or G-R-A-Y? G-R-A-Y is American, G-R-E-Y is British. I think G-R-E-Y looks prettier. But anyway, Yeah, or Elvish or your own conlang, correct, yes. That's it, I quit, I'm speaking Tolkien, Elvish, and Klingon forever. I am done with the rest of this. I quit, I'm done. So, Perfect It has a lot of these different tests. As you can see, there are a few different tests. Let's see. You have hyphenation consistency, n-dash consistency, whether you're using an n-dash or a hyphen, or an n-dash or a space. Similar words, wildcard, find and replace. It will look for all sorts of different punctuation things or consistency things, which Smart Edit does not really do as well. You can define your styles in this. You can tell it, let me pull it open, what my style sheet is. Let's see if it'll open or if it hangs. Here we go. So, say when Perfect It is running the test for hyphenation of phrases. It should warn me when it finds, and I will type in the phrase. If it finds this phrase, I would rather it that. So this is always fine. So when it's running these checks, I can define what I want it to show or not show and create my own style. If you aren't familiar with that, what that means, a style or a style guide is a specific and unique set of punctuation endemic to your books. A publisher will have a style guide. If you don't know what a style guide is, Chicago Manual of Style, the CMOS, is a style guide. AP Style, Associated Press Style, is a style guide. You have the APA Style, that is a style guide. A lot of you may be familiar with some of those words and some of those names from school when you were doing citations. I have to do citations in APA, MLA, Turabian, and oh god, why am I doing this? Those are all, in fact, different styles. So, but when you're looking at style, it actually includes more things than just how they cite. It includes whether or not they use an Oxford comma. It includes how they would hyphenate certain phrases or how they use specific aspects of punctuation and grammar. You do not need to be an expert on these in order to be a writer. I am just explaining to you what these are. The Chicago Manual of Style, the CMOS, is the one that most fiction writers are going to be using, and it's the one that is most commonly taught. And me mentioning this, in fact, that does tell you that yes, in fact, punctuation, there are multiple different ways to use punctuation, and sometimes rules are a little wibbly. Like commas. Sometimes commas get weird. Or hyphenation sometimes gets weird. And not all the manuals agree on how to do specific things. So, when you are working with one of these, you can kind of, to some extent, again, within some rules, I mean, you're always going, a serial comma has to exist in a series, but whether or not you're putting one before and or not, that's actually an option and a choice. Now, if you are a heathen and don't put a comma before and, you will face my fury and retribution, but I support your right to make your decisions for yourself. I will just hate it. It will make me angry, personally. I will find it deeply and personally offensive. But you can make your own choices. Dialogue cannot get away with that. You need to be so Kataru, that is actually one of the things that right here. Dialogue, you actually need to have the dialogue. If you're going to use serial commas or not use the Oxford comma, it needs to be consistent with how you punctuate your prose. You can't punctuate those two things differently. Again, that's the kind of thing we're looking for in copy editing. You cannot punctuate them differently. You can choose one style. If you are not going to put a comma before your and, not going to use the Oxford, it needs to be consistent throughout the entire thing. If you're going to use the Oxford, again, it needs to be consistent. The reason consistency is so important is because when things aren't consistent, readers will start noticing it. If something is a little bit weird and out of the box punctuation-wise, for example, in an upcoming novel that is coming out, I believe, in a few weeks, I think it's March 19 here, I ended up having to use several different kinds of brackets and stuff for quotation marks to simulate text chat on a computer screen, different kinds of text chat happening. That is slightly out of the box, but I'm consistent that the different kinds of chat are the different kinds of chat are put in different brackets. Carly, you ask, do I put says or said all the time or ignore it? That is not a consistency issue. If you put said after every single line of dialogue, it would be a nightmare to read. There are times when who is speaking is clear through context, and there are times where it's not. Using dialogue tags, so stead or yelled or whispered or whatever it is, a dialogue tag, using it or not is more a function of, is it clear in that moment who is speaking or not? That isn't a style thing. So that's not inherently going to be consistent, because sometimes you're going to use dialogue tags, sometimes you're not. That isn't a copy editing issue. And yeah, so Kataru, that is actually a thing. Sometimes there are points where narratively, again, in that book that I mentioned, the one with the brackets, there are a few times where there are run-on sentences which are intended to and designed to feel like somebody thinking a bunch of thoughts all at once without taking a breath. They're chaotic, and they're intended to be that way. So instead of punctuating them quote unquote accurately, I left them as they were because they convey a specific feeling in a specific moment. That isn't, again, a serious inconsistency. What that is using punctuation to heighten the narrative structure. And that's not something most of us think about, is the fact that punctuation does serve a role in telling the story. How you punctuate and where you punctuate is a big part of telling the story. So that is something to consider. We have like a minute or two left because it is 7. Does anybody have any questions? I know this took me a very long time. You have my apologies mostly. So what is it that I can do? Do you have any questions here that I can answer? Specific grammar questions, I don't know if I want to get into the details of specific grammar right now, but if anybody has any grammar questions, ask them in the chat and I'll answer them, because it's much more easy. It's much easier for me to answer things like that in text when I can show you the punctuation, rather than trying to describe it, because my brain does not work that way. What are other common filler words? That's a good question. I cannot pull a list up off the top of my head, but that is one of the most common, honestly. I don't know most of the filler words that people use are, a lot of them are unique to the writer. So a specific writer will kind of start adding a filler word or lean on a particular word a lot. I don't really want to give you a prejudice against any particular words. So use something like Smart Edit Lite. It will pull up the number of times you use a word, and you can use that, and you can kind of look at it as a ratio. So if I have a 62,000 word novel and I use a word 500 times, 500 seems like a really big number, but unless I'm using that word back to back to back, like it's all on the same page or on the same like 3 pages, it's not going to be too bad. Yes, The Crucible. A witch hunt. Excellent. So definitely, there are a ton of words, but mostly you're going to want to look for what you use in your own writing. For example, my crutch word that my editor pointed out to me and whacked me with a newspaper for was though. I used though instead of but everywhere, and she was like, would you just knock that off? And there were times where it wasn't helpful and it wasn't improving anything, but I liked using it, and in the moment it felt good. And she made me look at it and she's like, look, you use it 4 times in 3 sentences. I'm going to stab you. Please stop. And I went, yes, ma'am. Which isn't an exact representation of the conversation, but it isn't entirely wrong, because I know she wanted to whack me with a newspaper, and she was not wrong at all. And while I pushed back and kept a few of them, I didn't remove every single one of the manuscript, but I did take a firmer look at how many times did I really use this, and do I need to, oh man, I did. So, just, it's more of a personal thing. Will I do a talk on pacing after this? So after this, everybody who's still here, I'm going to be taking a break for a couple of weeks because I have surgery Tuesday. It's been in the announcements a few times. So we're not going to have a meeting from me for at least 1 week, maybe 2. It's going to take me 6 before I'm out of the sling much. I'm not sure how quick my healing is going to go because I am having the joint capsule on my left shoulder tightened. So typing is not going to be super easy for me because I will be in a really awkward sling for a while. I'm going to be allowed to take my arm out of it for certain periods of time for certain activities, but that's going to be mostly a function of how well I'm healing. I will keep you all up to date on how I'm doing and when I'm going to be back in full swing, but it is going to be a little bit. And I'm sorry for that. I know a lot of people rely on this. If anybody would like to jump in the meantime and have some talks or just hangouts, I am all for that, but I'm not going to be up to running anything. Thank you all for the good wishes, and thank you all for the warm well wishes. I will see you on the other side. It's time for me to go play Pathfinder. My campaign finished, so I'm not murdering my players anymore. I just get to be one. Yes! Victory is mine. After a 4-year stint of the Perma DM, I am taking a break. It is fabulous. I hope you have a great night, and I will talk to you all later. Take care and stay safe out there. Things are scary. We are here to support you. Stay safe, and just remember you've got a community here, so I will talk to you later.